Imagine a prison where freedom is no longer decided by a judge, a jury, or even a parole board. Imagine a prison where algorithms weigh your past, predict your future, and decide the terms of your confinement. Imagine walking into a facility where robots patrol the halls. Cameras don't just record, they analyze, predict, and alert. This is not science fiction. This is the direction incarceration is moving, and it is closer than most people realize. The moment a person enters this world, the rules change. Decisions once guided by human intuition, imperfect, flawed, yet deeply moral, are increasingly delegated to systems that claim objectivity, that promise efficiency, that reduce lives to data points. And once your future becomes a number, your humanity can begin to feel secondary. Across the globe, justice systems are experimenting with AI. Predictive policing analyzes neighborhoods, social patterns, and arrest histories to identify high-risk individuals before a crime is committed. Risk scores influence bail, sentencing, and parole decisions. Every action, every association, every past incident is converted into a probability. Low risk, medium risk, high risk. The unsettling truth: these scores often reflect the biases of the past. Data is rarely neutral. If certain communities have been over-policed historically, algorithms inherit those patterns. If sentencing was harsher for certain demographics, the system remembers. Bias becomes automated, efficient, invisible. And the decisions made in courtrooms ripple silently into correctional facilities. Inside modern prisons, automation doesn't stop at predictive analytics. Surveillance systems track movement, analyze behavior, and flag patterns. An inmate pacing too often, lingering in a corridor, or interacting with certain individuals may trigger alerts. The system decides who gets attention, who gets monitored more closely, and who becomes high risk. Supporters claim this reduces violence. It allows correctional officers to respond faster and more efficiently. It ensures consistent enforcement of rules. But efficiency has a hidden cost. The longer humans rely on machines to interpret behavior, the more human judgment erodes. Officers defer to screens. Supervisors trust dashboards. Decisions become data-driven, not empathy-driven. And when something goes wrong, accountability becomes murky. Was it the officer who intervened, the software that flagged the situation, the algorithm that influenced the decision weeks ago, or no one at all? The most dangerous shift occurs quietly. Power moves from individuals to the systems they control. Proprietary software, complex algorithms, and opaque decision-making structures ensure few outside can understand or challenge the rules. Appealing a machine's decision is not the same as appealing a human's judgment. There is no cross-examination, no courtroom debate, no chance to plead for context. Every movement, every action, every interaction leaves a digital footprint. Data does not forget. A single misinterpreted behavior can influence risk scores for months or years. This isn't just control. It's a form of behavioral shaping. Consider a scenario. An inmate is assigned a higher risk score because of previous minor infractions. Automated systems flag them for more frequent monitoring. They are moved to a more restrictive unit. Opportunities for rehabilitation programs are reduced. The system interprets stress or withdrawal as noncompliance. Behavior that might have been contextualized by a human observer is instead quantified, ranked, and acted upon. The effect is cumulative, over weeks, months, and years. Automated interventions begin to dictate the daily reality of life behind bars. Decisions that used to be nuanced become standardized, codified, and, most critically, predictable. And outside the prison walls, predictive policing continues to shape the narrative. Communities labeled as high-risk experience heavier surveillance. People with higher risk scores are flagged by probation officers, influencing employment opportunities, housing options, and social mobility. AI begins to define who deserves attention, who is a threat, and who has the chance to rebuild. It's subtle, gradual, and dangerously persuasive. But this is where the story becomes even darker. Humans start to defer too much. Officers stop noticing minor changes in behavior, assuming the system has flagged what matters. Administrators trust the dashboards more than direct observation. Every interaction, every decision, every judgment is mediated by technology. The human element, intuition, empathy, moral reasoning fades, and once that fades, the system appears infallible, the frightening reality. This is exactly what many experts warn about, a prison system that appears efficient, fair, and scientific, but slowly erodes the very human oversight that ensures justice. Now ask yourself this: what happens when predictive tools misclassify someone? When an algorithm deems a person high risk based on incomplete or biased data, the consequences are real. Restrictive housing, denial of parole, reduced access to programs. And the person affected may have little recourse, and because the system moves faster than legislation, oversight rarely catches up. What seems like a small technological improvement today may cement a form of automated injustice tomorrow. Even more chilling is the psychological effect. Inmates know they are constantly being watched, analyzed, and scored. Every action has consequences that extend beyond the immediate moment. Stress, paranoia, and hypervigilance become part of daily life. Trust becomes conditional, behavior is curated, compliance is optimized not necessarily through fear of humans, but fear of the system itself. This creates a quiet, pervasive control mechanism, unlike anything seen before. The integration of AI doesn't just change enforcement, it changes identity. Individuals become patterns, lives are reduced to data points. The system doesn't care about nuance or context, it measures compliance, predicts future risk, and reinforces hierarchy. Once freedom is defined by algorithmic interpretation, the human experience of justice begins to feel optional. And here's the most important truth: this is already happening. Some facilities in Europe, the US, and Asia are experimenting with automated monitoring, predictive behavior scoring, and AI-assisted parole decisions. The question is not if it will spread, but how quickly and how transparently it will be implemented. Imagine walking into a future where correctional officers rely on alerts rather than judgment, parole boards consult dashboards rather than dialogue, and individuals live in constant awareness that every decision, every word, every gesture is being evaluated by software. The very concept of guilt, risk, and freedom is being recalibrated by lines of code. This is why the future of incarceration is as thrilling as it is terrifying, because efficiency is not justice, and control is not freedom. If you've ever wondered how technology could redefine crime, punishment, and human oversight, now is the time to pay attention. Subscribe now and join us, because in the next chapter, we dive into predictive policing, AI-assisted sentencing, and the chilling reality of a world where your freedom could be determined before you even commit a crime. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Predictive policing begins with a promise: the promise that crime can be prevented before it happens, that violence can be stopped before it unfolds, that data, if analyzed correctly, can make societies safer. But behind that promise lies a far more uncomfortable reality. Because once a system starts predicting crime, it must also decide who is most likely to commit it. And that decision changes everything. It starts quietly, almost invisibly. Police departments feed years, sometimes decades of data into predictive systems: arrest records, patrol logs, crime reports, geographic patterns, time-of-day statistics, social associations. The algorithm looks for patterns humans might miss: where crime clusters, when it spikes, who appears repeatedly in the data. At first, the output seems harmless: heat maps showing areas of high risk, forecasts suggesting where patrols should be sent, a tool to allocate resources more efficiently. But then the scope expands. The system doesn't just predict places, it begins to predict people. Risk scores emerge. Individuals are ranked based on likelihood, not guilt, not innocence. Likelihood of reoffending, likelihood of association, likelihood of future threat. These scores quietly influence decisions long before anyone steps inside a courtroom. Who gets stopped more often? Who gets searched? Who is monitored? Who is flagged? And once flagged, escaping the system becomes almost impossible. Here's the unsettling truth most people never hear. Predictive policing doesn't create new data. It feeds on old data. And old data reflects old decisions. If certain neighborhoods were historically overpoliced, the system learns that those areas are high risk. If certain groups were arrested more frequently, the system assumes higher threat. If bias existed before, it doesn't disappear, it gets automated. The machine doesn't know fairness, it knows frequency. And frequency becomes destiny. As patrols increase in predicted areas, arrests naturally increase. More police presence means more recorded incidents. Those incidents feed back into the system. The algorithm sees confirmation. The prediction appears correct. But what's really happening is a feedback loop, one that tightens. Quietly, relentlessly, the system doesn't ask whether crime is actually higher. It only asks whether crime is detected more often, and detection becomes reality. Over time, predictive policing stops feeling like a suggestion. It becomes policy. Officers are directed where to patrol. Departments are evaluated based on alignment with algorithmic recommendations. Deviating from the system becomes risky. Because if something goes wrong, and the algorithm was ignored, responsibility suddenly becomes very clear. Trust shifts, not toward people, toward predictions. This is where the logic turns dangerous. When a system identifies someone as high risk, interactions change, officers approach differently, surveillance increases, tolerance decreases. Minor infractions escalate, warnings become citations. Citations become arrests, and the individual's record grows not necessarily because behavior changed, but because attention did. The system doesn't see the difference. It only sees confirmation. Now imagine how this logic flows into incarceration. Risk scores generated on the street don't disappear at sentencing. They follow people into courtrooms. Judges are shown assessments. Parole boards review probabilities. Correctional facilities receive profiles. A person is no longer just serving time. They are serving a forecast inside prison. Predictive logic continues its work. Behavioral data is collected constantly. Movement, interactions, compliance, emotional indicators. Automated systems look for signs of instability, aggression, or future misconduct. Those flagged as high risk face stricter conditions. More surveillance, less access to programs, fewer opportunities for early release. And here's the paradox: the very restrictions imposed to manage risk can increase stress, isolation, and deterioration, factors the system then interprets as further risk. The loop closes. What's chilling is how natural this begins to feel, because nothing looks violent, nothing looks cruel, nothing looks unjust. It looks efficient, clean, rational. That's the danger. Predictive systems don't shout their authority. They whisper it. They embed themselves into routine until no one questions why certain people are always watched more closely, or why certain outcomes feel inevitable. And once inevitability sets in, resistance fades. Supporters argue that predictive policing saves lives, that it allows intervention before harm occurs, that it removes emotion from decision-making, that it creates consistency. And sometimes, in isolated cases, it does. But consistency without fairness is not justice, and prediction without accountability is not prevention. There is another layer rarely discussed: transparency. Most predictive systems are proprietary. Their algorithms are protected as intellectual property. Their logic is not open to public scrutiny, which means the people affected by their decisions cannot fully understand or challenge the process. You cannot confront a probability. You cannot cross-examine a prediction. You cannot argue with a model trained on invisible assumptions. This raises a chilling possibility: a world where punishment is shaped not by actions, but by anticipation, where people are treated as risks rather than individuals, where freedom becomes conditional on a machine's confidence. Imagine growing up in a neighborhood labeled high risk. Imagine being monitored more closely from childhood. Imagine every mistake carrying disproportionate weight. By the time incarceration enters the picture, the outcome feels prewritten. And once released, predictive systems don't forget. Probation monitoring, employment screenings, housing checks. The shadow of prediction follows. This is not a distant dystopia. Versions of this system already exist. The infrastructure is in place. The data is abundant. The incentives, efficiency, cost reduction, control are powerful. The only question is how far society is willing to let prediction replace judgment, because justice was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be human, flawed, contextual, accountable, and when that humanity is replaced by automated certainty, something irreversible begins to happen. Here is the most unsettling thought of all. Predictive policing doesn't just change how crime is addressed, it changes how people are seen, not as who they are, but as who they might become. And once that shift is complete, the future of incarceration looks less like rehabilitation and more like management. If this story is making you uneasy, it should. Because the systems shaping tomorrow's prisons are being built today quietly, incrementally, and with little public debate. Subscribe now, because in the next chapter, we expose what happens when automation moves fully inside prison walls, where it doesn't just predict behavior, but enforces control, replaces human oversight, and reshapes what freedom even means. This isn't the future anymore. It's the direction we're already heading. The prison of the future does not announce itself with iron bars or watchtowers. It announces itself with silence. No shouting guards, no clanging keys, no obvious force. Instead, there are sensors, algorithms, automated systems humming quietly in the background, watching everything, missing nothing. This is where predictive logic becomes physical reality. Inside these facilities, control no longer depends on human presence. Cameras don't just record, they interpret. Motion sensors don't just detect movement, they analyze intent. Behavioral models track posture, pacing, tone of voice, and interaction patterns. Searching for deviation from what the system defines as normal, normal becomes the standard of survival. Every inmate exists inside a constantly updating profile. Risk scores shift in real time. A restless night, an argument overheard, a sudden withdrawal, each data point nudges the system's assessment. And the system responds instantly. Lights dim, doors lock, privileges disappear, not as punishment, as prevention. This is the promise of automated incarceration. Remove emotion, remove bias, remove unpredictability. But what's removed most quickly is humanity, because when enforcement becomes automatic, there is no moment for reflection, no chance for mercy, no space for explanation. The system does not ask why. It only reacts to what. And once reactions become automated, escalation becomes inevitable. In these environments, correctional officers don't disappear, but their role changes. They become monitors of monitors, overseers of systems they no longer fully control. Decisions are suggested, ranked, and optimized before a human ever intervenes. The screen becomes authority. When an alert flashes red, intervention is expected. Questioning the system feels reckless. Ignoring it feels negligent. Responsibility shifts upward to administrators, to policies, to the invisible logic embedded in code. And when something goes wrong, no one can point to a single decision maker. Because no one made the decision alone. Robotic patrol units begin as safety tools, machines that move through corridors, scanning for contraband, monitoring compliance, and reducing the need for physical confrontation. They don't get tired, they don't lose focus, they don't hesitate. At first, they're welcomed, incidents decline, efficiency increases, reports praise reduced costs and improved safety metrics. But slowly, dependence forms, human presence decreases, interpersonal judgment fades. Inmates adapt not to people but to patterns. They learn how the machines think, or rather, how they calculate. Behavior becomes performative. Every action is optimized to avoid triggering alerts. Conversations are muted, movements are measured, emotional expression is suppressed. Because deviation invites scrutiny, the prison becomes quieter, but not calmer. Because silence does not equal peace, it equals pressure. This is where the system's greatest flaw reveals itself. I can measure behavior, but it cannot understand suffering. It can detect agitation, but not despair, compliance, but not hopelessness, silence, but not surrender. Mental health deteriorates quietly in environments designed for control, not care. Automated responses address symptoms, not causes. Isolation is prescribed where connection is needed. Restriction is applied where rehabilitation once stood. And the system records success because incidents are down. The data looks perfect. The reality is not. When release decisions are influenced by automated assessments, the stakes rise even higher. Parole boards consult dashboards. Progress is quantified. Risk reduction is plotted over time. And individual's future is displayed as a curve trending upward or downward. Appeals become statistical. Arguments. How do you explain growth to a machine? How do you argue change against historical data? How do you prove who you've become when the system remembers who you were? The algorithm is cautious by design. It favors certainty, and uncertainty always leans toward denial. Freedom becomes conditional not on rehabilitation, but on predictability. Outside the prison walls, the system doesn't let go. Wearable monitors track movement. AI analyzes routines. Deviations trigger alerts. Probation becomes a continuation of incarceration, digitized, distributed, and constant. The line between inside and outside blurs. Incarceration becomes a status, not a place. Supporters argue this is safer, that automation reduces violence, that data-driven systems eliminate favoritism, that technology makes justice more consistent. But consistency is not morality, and safety achieved through total control comes at a price society rarely calculates. Here is the final question no system can answer: who is accountable when automated justice fails? When a misclassification leads to harm, when a false alert escalates into tragedy, when a life is permanently altered by a probability that was wrong. Is it the officer who followed protocol, the administrator who approved the software, the company that built the algorithm, or the society that allowed efficiency to replace oversight? Responsibility dissolves into process, and when responsibility disappears, injustice becomes permanent. This is the true future of incarceration if left unchecked. Not a world of overt cruelty but one of quiet, systemic control. Not chains but code, not guards but logic. A system that doesn't hate you, doesn't fear you, doesn't understand you. It simply manages you. And here's the most chilling part. Once the system is normalized inside prisons, it doesn't stay there. The same logic moves outward into schools, workplaces, public spaces, behavior scoring, risk profiling, automated intervention. The prison becomes the prototype. Society becomes the test environment. The future of incarceration forces a decision humanity cannot avoid. Do we use technology to assist human judgment, or do we replace judgment entirely? Do we value efficiency over empathy, prediction over possibility, control over redemption? Because once we surrender moral authority to machines, taking it back may be impossible. This is not a warning about technology. It's a warning about abdication. About what happens when humans step back and let systems decide what justice looks like. If this story made you uncomfortable, that means it's working. Because the future being built right now demands scrutiny, debate, and accountability before silence becomes policy and automation becomes destiny. Subscribe to this channel, because this is only the beginning. In upcoming stories, we'll uncover real-world cases, hidden technologies, and unseen consequences shaping justice systems across the globe. The question isn't whether this future is coming. The question is whether anyone will stop and ask, should it?